You're listening to Boomers Today with your host, Frank Sampson.
Well, welcome to Boomers Today. I'm your host, Frank Sampson. Of course, each week we bring you important and useful information on issues facing baby boomers, their parents, and other loved ones. And I can't thank everybody enough for all their support. Our listeners are growing each and every day. Many of you are listening to it on various stations like Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, iHeartRadio. Many of you are going right to our website at boomerstodayradio.com. So a lot of different ways to listen to it. And I think our listeners are growing because you're sharing with friends and family podcasts that you've listened to that you want others to listen to, because we have just some wonderful guests on our show, and we have for quite a long time. And today's not going to be any different. We have with us Dr. Richard Caro. I should have asked you, Richard, is it Caro or Caro?
It's Caro, Frank.
Caro, there we go. Dr. Richard Caro, who is a co-founder of Tech Enhanced Life, a public benefit corporation with the mission of improving the quality of life of the aging and their families. He is also CEO of Tangible Future Incorporated, an interventional management consultancy. Richard has been responsible for development of a number of successful products, has 24 issued patents, and received a PhD in physics from Oxford University, where he was a Rhodes Scholar. He is an active member of several Silicon Valley angel investor groups with a particular focus on the intersection of healthcare, aging, and technology. So, Richard, thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. I'm looking forward to talking.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got an amazing background, and congratulations on that. I always like to hear kind of the history of, what got you into this field. It's such an important field, but what led you into it?
There's always lots of different factors for something like that, aren't there? But I think the key thought is that a number of years ago, I and some colleagues were sitting around thinking about areas where technology or new innovations could really make a big impact on the world. That's what you do if you're an entrepreneur sort of person. And there's always demographic issues around aging that everyone is probably aware of on this podcast. More older adults, fewer caregivers. And so we felt that technology had the potential to really help people grow older in better ways. And we founded Tech Enhanced Life primarily as a social venture to try and help somehow impact that, to try and find ways to lead to better products that can improve the quality of life of people as we age. And we've explored a number of different ways to do that. It's a bit of an experiment, but that was really our motivation for getting into it.
So how do you reach out to people that, could use this type of technology? I know you have, maybe you could get into it a little bit more about Longevity Explorers. Maybe that's your means of reaching out. Is that correct?
Well, we've got a few different things that we do, but let me introduce the Longevity Explorers, because I think that's really, in many ways, one of the most exciting things that we've ended up being involved with. When we first looked at this space, what was really interesting was two things. First, if you start to explore the kind of challenges to do with growing older, there are lots of them, right? There's no shortage of challenges that one could try and impact. But then the second thing that was obvious when we started doing this, probably back in 2014, I think now, was that when there were conversations about gadgets for aging or better ways to take care of older adults, there were pretty much never older adults involved in the actual conversation. And I found that a bit surprising. And so we decided that maybe it would be interesting to start a sort of a club, which we called the Longevity Explorers. And the Longevity Explorers Club is all about groups of older adults getting together to interact and sort of swap ideas about different tools they've found that are useful in their lives or the lives of their spouses or sometimes the lives of their parents. And as the group grew, we started to test out products and write about them. We have a website called TechEnhanceLife.com where we publish the results of the Longevity Explorer interactions, plus some stuff that other members of our community do in, deep dives into products. And so at this point, the way that we reach out to people or the way that people learn about what we do is partly this club, this Longevity Explorer Club, which has circles in a number of different places around the US, but also our website, TechEnhanceLife.com, where we publish all this sort of stuff.
So is there actually, so there's people kind of testing out products or introducing new products or both?
So we don't develop actual products ourselves, and we certainly don't sell products, but we do evaluate products. And so if we get excited about a particular product category, we will sometimes go out and acquire all the products and put them through some sort of quasi-scientific evaluation protocol. And then our goal is usually to find which products work best for particular types of people, and we write that up and publish that on Tech Enhanced Life. We also sometimes get approached by companies that are developing something and would like the voice of the older adult to be involved. Mostly they just go off and develop the product, ignoring the customers, we found, which is disappointing. But there are now a growing number of companies that think that actually it makes sense to try out their ideas on the older adults who are going to be using those products and incorporate their feedback in developing the product. So we have a kind of little consulting business where we help companies do that, which has really been rewarding in many ways, because in each case, the company usually discovers something kind of radically surprising when their ideas get in front of actual older adults. And second of all, the older adults, our explorers, really enjoy that sort of stuff.
I get, I'm sure you do too. That's why I got into it. I get kind of excited when you see kind of new technologies. What are some of the things that maybe, you could share with our listeners on some of the technology out there for older adults that maybe a lot of people wouldn't even know exist? Anything at all that you could share?
Yeah, there's kind of quite a few we could talk about. Why don't I just give you the highlights and then you can, pick some to dig into more if you want. I think the first area that I want to mention is this whole idea of connecting virtually using things like Zoom, because what's fascinating is before COVID, video conferences and things like that with our Explorer groups were something that they knew about but weren't terribly enthusiastic about mostly. And then during COVID, of course, they've all, or many of them have adapted to this new way of virtual interaction. And there's a whole class of technology gadgets that make it easier to have these virtual interactions. Of course, for the technically savvy, you just get on your computer and hop on Zoom or something. But there are also products that work for less technology capable people. And so we spent quite a lot of time looking at all the different gadgets that could let you interact from your room in your house or in your independent living facility or your assisted living facility to your kids or grandkids on the other side of the country. And we came up with this whole kind of map of, depending on what type of person you are, there's different products that work best for you. So that's the first area I just want to mention, is virtual connections.
So I do have a
question. I could go on. But
we'll talk about
ahead.
more, but maybe we could talk about that in particular, because I think that's a real important one, especially, listen, having, been through the whole COVID experience and people kind of locked in their homes or in their communities for a period of time and not have able to meet with loved ones, certainly that's huge. But even in a normal environment, many times you have
Right.
family members and friends that are not nearby. So I think it's a wonderful thing, having that. Is the technology more phone based, computer based? I mean, we would assume that maybe certain seniors would have a computer, and maybe many more are getting it, but some don't. So is it phone based as well?
Well, there's always some sort of piece of electronics involved. And for people who have a computer, there's all sorts of different apps and things that run on that computer. But for the people who aren't that comfortable with the computer or don't really either can't master it or don't wish to, then there's a kind of spectrum of different other electronic gadgets. They're mostly not just the old telephone. Of course, the telephone is one way to connect virtually, but everyone knows about that already, right? And the power of some of these other tools is that they're not the telephone. So they mostly involve a gadget of some sort. The key differences are how difficult it is to use and set up and stuff like that. And that's where there's some kind of spectrum of products.
Right. Do you know what I don't expect you necessarily to know this, but maybe you do. But as you know, I deal in working with people in assisted living and memory care quite a bit, and I've heard from communities that the number one, I don't want to say complaint as much as number one request coming from the residents is I can't get my TV to work. That's that is the number one. So maybe put that on. Maybe put that in there, that if there's a way to do that simply, and I can understand it because I myself have sometimes have trouble with all the streaming shows and all of that today. But just thought I would bring that up. That's all. But
yeah, well, can I riff on that for a sec?
Sure, absolutely, yeah.
Because one of the fun things about our Explorer community is that it ranges from people who, are interested in new ideas but not at all tech savvy, to retired engineers and people like that who are playing around with all sorts of do-it-yourself projects to make life easier using technology. And one of our explorers has spent a lot of energy over the last year or two looking at new, what we call smart home implementations. And so basically what that involves is ways to add intelligence to things in your home. And one of the articles that he wrote is about how to make TV easy for his 94-year-old aunt, because he has a 94-year-old aunt, and she had exactly the complaint that you were talking about the television. And so he's I'm not going to go into all the exact details of how he did this today, but it is written up on the Tech Enhanced Life website. But he basically addressed all of the issues people talk about, such as the difficulties of finding the right streaming service, or the difficulties of finding the right channel, or how to find your show exactly. People, talk about the complexity of the remote controls. These are all sort of issues. And he actually also loves voice interfaces. And so he set it up so that his aunt can say something like, I want to watch show X, right? Whatever one of her
Right.
favorite shows is. And it automatically starts playing that. And so things like that, I think, are really indicative of where this field can go.
Yeah, it's amazing. So I know, you talked about, virtual and the Zoom type calls. What are some of the other kind of hot product categories that you see?
Well, we sort of just touched on this smart home issue, so let me just expand on that a little bit. I think that's a particularly interesting area because right now, the elements of the smart home require quite a lot of setting up and managing and all that, so they're not terribly user-friendly yet. But what we've seen is a number of interesting examples that right now require, you know, your son or daughter to be tech savvy to help you with it if you're an older adult, but which in the future will be made easier, in my opinion. And they do things like that. There's all sorts of clever reminders. There's a series recently for people suffering from cognitive impairment or dementia, who are still living in a place where they have some independence, you know, not in a memory unit. And there are ways to have it so that when they get out of bed in the middle of the night and start wandering, there are much more sophisticated ways to interact with them than just an alarm that sends an alert to a caregiver who has to come running. There are ways to remind them and have some colored lights and things like that. So this whole smart home thing has a whole range of different, both labor saving and helping type features that can get implemented. And I think that's going to be increasingly important going forward.
Yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on, could technology, well, certainly they could support the particular older adult that we know. They could support, there's technology like you just mentioned, that could support caregivers who are, you know, caring for an older adult. Could some technology actually replace certain functions of a caregiver, do you believe? And do you think that will even be more so in the future? Or is that you just can't replace a caregiver technologically?
I think this is a really interesting topic. And I wrote something about it not that long ago. And I'll tell you how I feel about it. I think if we're not careful, it becomes a little bit too simplistic when we start talking about replacing, right? So here's how I think about it. I think that humans can do a lot of things. And, you know, if you're a billionaire and you have an entire staff of humans to do everything for you, then, you know, you don't need technology, I suppose. You just hire another human. But most people aren't billionaires. And so the conversation, I don't think, is so much about whether technology can replace humans. It's about how do you have the right balance of humans doing things that only humans can do and technology doing things that you don't actually need a human for, so that you can live in the best way. And let me give you some examples. Here's a really simplistic example. Suppose you're an older adult and you have arthritis and you like to eat food that happens to come in jars or cans as part of your diet, and you aren't really easily able to open those jars yourself due to the arthritis in your hands, right? That's a pretty common scenario.
Right, exactly.
So you got a couple of approaches to that. You could hire somebody. You could have a caregiver who you might have anyway, but you could have them come every meal, or you could decide you aren't going to eat the food you particularly like except on Thursday afternoons when they come. That would be one approach. That's the human approach. Or you could spend $20 and buy a gadget that helps you open jars even with arthritis. And then, you know what? You have your autonomy back. You don't really need the caregiver for that. And I use that incredibly simplistic example because I suppose you could say that's replacing the caregiver. It is. You know, you could have had the caregiver come and open the jar for you, but now you're using a gadget. That's replacing them, I suppose. But it's a good example where you didn't really need a person to do that, you know, to open a jar. It's actually much better if you have a kind of gadget that lets you do it yourself. So for areas like that, I do think technology can replace caregivers. But there's other areas where it's much harder, you know, so anything that requires love or human emotion and stuff like that. There's lots of soft areas where the human input is incredibly important. And so there, I don't think technology is going to be the replacement. It's more of an enabler, I think, to kind of complement what the humans are going to do.
No, that's a great example. Great example. So we're going to take a real quick break just to recognize our sponsor, Richard, and then I'll be back and we'll continue our conversation. I want to talk more about your longevity explorers. That's very interesting, and I want people to learn more about that. So I ask all of you, do you know anybody who may be concerned about an older driver. Well, Senior Care Authority's Beyond Driving with Dignity program is a facilitated self-assessment program for older adults. It's designed to serve as a vital tool to facilitate older drivers and their families as they make appropriate decisions regarding the future of one's safe driving career. If the individual is a safe driver, an advisor will provide him or her with strategies on how to remain a safe driver as they progress through the aging process. If driving retirement is the appropriate decision, then the individual and their family are offered possible alternatives, resources, and a specific plan to ensure a smooth and successful transition from the driver's seat to the passenger seat. So to learn more, go to www.beyonddrivingwithdignity.com, or you could call 877-907-8841 to connect with an advisor, a Senior Care Authority advisor in your area. We're back with Dr. Richard Caro, who's the co-founder of Tech Enhanced Life and also the CEO of Tangible Future Incorporated. So, Richard, I could talk to you all day about this, but I'm sure you don't have the time to do it, and I don't know if I could do it either. But this is great stuff. This Longevity Explorers is extremely interesting to me. So I know we touched upon it, but maybe you could get in a little more detail, and also maybe even share how people could get involved in a group, or maybe even start their own group in their area. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'd love to. So before COVID, the explorers were organized into what we called circles, which are really groups that had some sort of geographic location, right? So we started one in San Francisco. Then we expanded to 5 in the California Bay Area, and then we started some up in other parts of the country, for example, Providence, Rhode Island, upstate New York. Initially, I was the facilitator of the first 5, and then we expanded to a different model that involved other people leading the groups and us kind of helping them learn how to do it, according to a sort of formula that we found worked. And then the discussions get audio recorded and uploaded to the Tech Enhanced Life website on a particular page for that circle, so other people around the world can benefit from the conversations. So they used to be geographic. But what really was interesting during COVID was we've learned, there were pluses and minuses, but as soon as COVID started, we realized that we couldn't continue to meet face to face. And so we weren't quite sure what the implications of that were initially. It seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it? 2 years ago or whatever, but
right.
like another life. Anyway, we were sitting there going, God, what are we going to do? And we decided that since we're all about technology, if we couldn't make them work virtually, no one could. So we set out to try and do that. And what was fascinating is it wasn't that hard at all, it turns out. The older adults in our Explorer groups, some of them had, quite significant challenges learning how to interact virtually, but with a bit of help, they almost all succeeded. I took away from that an interesting lesson, which was that technology in older adults, it's not so much whether people can do something, it's about how motivated they are. I think that's an important point. Anyway, so we turned them into virtual groups. Some of the circles did not make that transition, but many of them did. And then it became clear to us that these groups didn't need to be geographically located anymore. And so we started a couple of test groups that involved people from all around the country interacting virtually, Explorer circles that were countrywide rather than geographic. And so going forward, at least in the next year or so, what we're going to do mostly is we still have geographic groups, but we're increasingly putting our energy behind topic-focused groups that allow anybody to join. So, for example, we have a hearing explorer circle entirely for people who are interested in new technologies relating to hearing. And that's open to anybody from around the world, actually, although most of our members are in the US. And the way to become a member is to go to the Tech Enhanced Life website. I think there'll be a link in the show notes, I hope, techenhancedlife.com. And there's a place there where you can sign up to become a Longevity Explorer.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, yeah, we'll put it in the show notes, but so they would go to tech, T-E-C-H, enhanced life.com, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. So what I know we started to get into this, and I know that it seems as though the goal is that you're trying to help people, which I think is tremendous, to stay independent longer. There, being in the senior care industry and dealing with people with issues, stroke, dementia, and all that. What do you see kind of on the horizon, or what are you seeing now as it relates to trying to help those individuals who just don't have that option to really be that independent, but technology out there that could possibly help them? Anything you could share would be great.
In terms of types of technology, you're thinking?
Yeah, types of technology, right.
Well, there's all sorts of interesting things people are working on, but I usually try and stay away from stuff that's still in the research lab that you can't get your hands on. So if we focus on things that exist, I think I do actually think the smart home stuff we talked about has quite a lot of implications for people with cognition issues, especially earlier or mild cognition issues, to help them function more independently, which is of course good for the older adult, but also really good in terms of relieving the burden on caregivers. Technology can take over some of the mundane tasks. For example, what time is it? Questions like that, that can be answered by technology. But the other area that I think is really important that we didn't talk about yet is medication management.
Yes.
Because for people who there's a wide spectrum of people, right? Some people don't need lots of medications, but for people that have complicated medication regimens, which is a quite common thing, the whole management of that is one of the issues that often lead to someone moving from relative independence to less independence settings. And there's some really, I think, exciting tools, technology tools, products that help with medication management that have come out in the last couple of years. And I've noticed not that many people seem to be aware of them. And I think they're interesting for two reasons. One, they're technologically quite complex, which means I find them fascinating. But that's all buried under the hood. It's like a car. It's technologically complex, but it's not necessarily, you don't necessarily have to understand how it works. But in terms of its impact, I think these medication management gadgets can really help caregivers a lot in terms of reducing the amount of time and energy they have to spend on taking all the medications and carefully putting them into little compartments and things like that, and then worrying about whether they're taken on time and whether they're actually taken. These companies have tried to address all those things, and they're not 100% perfect, but I think they've done a pretty good job. So I think that's a category of products that's underappreciated but quite important.
Yeah, I would agree. I've seen some of those type of products in action, and it's pretty remarkable. Reminders going out, notices going out to a caregiver or a family member whether those medications were taken by the adult. Now, I mean, they won't know necessarily that they took it out of the dispenser and put it in their mouth, but they'll know that if they took it out of the dispenser. So it's quite interesting. Right. It's quite interesting. Well, great.
It is also, just the other part of it that you didn't mention is the older technologies still involve someone collecting all the different bottles of pills and carefully sorting them into little compartments on the day by day basis or hour by hour basis, and the more modern ones use robotic things inside them to automate that. So instead of having to sort all the pills, you sort of pour one bucket of pills into one compartment and another bucket into another one, and it all gets sorted out inside the machine. I think that's pretty incredible.
Yeah. A lot of the pharmacies now are shipping that medication all set up for that purpose. So it's
that's cool too. But I was actually talking about a machine that you have in your house that does all that for you.
Right. Oh, I gotcha. No, that's great. Well, this has been fantastic. There's so many other things we could talk about, and there's going to be new technologies out there. So I just want to give you an open invitation, Richard. We'd love to have you back in the future and talk about any new technologies that are going on and what's going on with your organization. So I hope you'll come back at some point.
Sure, I'd love to. It's been a pleasure, Frank. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's been great. So I just want to thank you so much for joining us on Boomers Today, Richard. Thank you. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Please be safe out there, and we'll talk to everybody real soon.
You've been listening to Boomers Today with Frank Sampson. To learn more about today's show, visit boomerstodayradio.com and join us next time for another edition of Boomers Today.